You know, that feeling right around February 2nd when, like, everyone's kind of waiting on pins and needles to hear if Punxsutawney Phil saw his shadow or not. Well, that's what we're diving into today. Groundhog Day.
We're going way past just, those headlines about 6 more weeks of winter or early spring, right? We're really going to uncover those surprising origins and hidden meanings behind Groundhog Day.
Okay, so I guess we have to start with the big question right off the bat. Did Punxsutawney Phil see his shadow this year?
Drum roll, please.
He did.
Oh, no. So does that mean, according to tradition, I guess, 6 more weeks of winter?
Yep, that's what the tradition says. 6 more weeks of winter.
Oh, man. I've always kind of wondered, how accurate are these predictions, really? It seems like every year there's all this debate about whether, Phil got it right or not.
Yeah, you're right. There's always a lot of buzz about how accurate he is, but the official accuracy rate is only about 39%.
39%. So what, basically like flipping a coin would give us the same results?
Yeah, statistically, it's no better than chance. So then why are we so obsessed with this rodent predicting the weather, right? If he's basically just as good as a coin toss.
Well, that's where the history gets really interesting. This tradition isn't about meteorological precision. It's really about something a lot older and deeper.
Okay, so where did it all begin?
Well, Groundhog Day, believe it or not, actually evolved from an ancient Christian holiday called Candlemas. It was celebrated in Europe.
Oh, wow. So we're talking even older than the United States.
Yeah, way older. And Candlemas marked the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox.
Okay. See.
And the belief was that if the weather was clear and sunny on Candlemas, it meant a really prolonged winter.
Oh, that makes sense. More sunshine equals more winter, right?
But I'm still a little fuzzy on how the groundhog got involved in all of this.
Right. So the Europeans originally used badgers or hedgehogs to make these predictions.
Hedgehogs. Interesting.
Yeah, so when German immigrants settled in Pennsylvania, they brought this tradition with them, but hedgehogs weren't exactly plentiful over here. Ah, I see. Makes sense.
Yeah, so they had to adapt. So they turned to the groundhog, a creature that was super abundant in the Pennsylvania region, as a substitute.
So that's how Punxsutawney Phil and his whole shadow-seeing legacy were born. Like, that's how he came to be.
Exactly. The first official Groundhog Day celebration in Punxsutawney was held in 1887.
Wow, 1887.
Yep. And now, over a century later, it's just exploded. It's a full-blown cultural phenomenon.
And it's not just Phil anymore, right? We've got, like, all these other groundhogs popping up all over, making their own predictions.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Like Staten Island Chuck in New York, Buckeye Chuck in Ohio.
Yeah.
They all want in on Phil's prognosticating glory, I guess.
So are these other groundhogs like serious rivals to Phil's throne, or are they just playing along for the fun of it?
Well, each of them has its own dedicated following. Like regional pride is definitely a factor.
I bet.
But they often end up, with different predictions.
Oh, really?
Which, I guess, just goes to show that maybe we shouldn't be relying on rodents for our weather forecasts.
So why do we still do it then? I mean, it's clearly not about scientific accuracy, right? We've established that.
Well, I think that's kind of the beauty of it. It's not about the precision. It's about the tradition, the community, that anticipation leading up to it. It's about embracing something whimsical and fun, especially in the middle of winter. I mean, let's be honest. Who doesn't love a good excuse to, like, wear a silly hat and celebrate with a crowd in the middle of February?
You got a point there. Okay, you've convinced me. But I have to ask, have you ever actually been to a Groundhog Day celebration yourself? What's the vibe like in Punxsutawney on February 2nd?
Oh, it's an experience unlike any other, let me tell you. Picture this.
Yeah.
Thousands of people bundled up against the cold, right?
Yeah.
And there's this palpable sense of anticipation in the air, It's just this mix of excitement, tradition, and good-natured fun.
It sounds like a party.
Oh, it totally is. There's music and food and dancing. It's a real community celebration.
Yeah.
And then, when Phil makes his prediction, the roar of the crowd is deafening, regardless of whether he actually saw his shadow or not.
So even if we know it's not scientifically accurate, there's just something about this tradition that brings people together.
Absolutely. It's a shared experience, a connection to our past, and like a reminder that even in the depths of winter, there's always a reason to, celebrate and look forward to those brighter days ahead.
Well said. But let's get back to, like, the ceremony itself. It's not like Phil just casually walks out of his burrow and glances at his shadow, right? There's got to be a whole spectacle involved.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. The Groundhog Day ceremony in Punxsutawney is super orchestrated. It's, steeped in tradition and pageantry, and it starts, like, at the crack of dawn,
Yeah.
with thousands of eager spectators gathered at Gobbler's Knob.
Gobbler's Knob. Now that's a name that sticks with you. So how does this all work? Like, how does the whole ceremony unfold?
Okay, so imagine a group of men, all in top hats and tuxedos, and they call themselves the Inner Circle, right? And they're like the keepers of Phil's legacy. They carefully extract Phil from his burrow and then hold him up for the crowd to see.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It really is. And in the Inner Circle, they claim to communicate with Phil in Groundhoggies to get his prediction.
Groundhoggies? Really? Come on, is that a real thing?
Well, that's the thing. The specifics of Groundhoggies are like a closely guarded secret, known only to the Inner Circle.
So we'll just have to take their word for it, I guess.
Pretty much. They say they understand Phil's every squeak and twitch, but, whether it's a real language or just part of the show, it definitely adds to the whole mystery of the whole thing.
Well, I guess we'll never know for sure, which I guess adds to the whole intrigue. But we've only just scratched the surface of this Groundhog Day deep dive. What other fascinating facts and stories await us? Stay tuned as we continue our exploration. Welcome back to our deep dive into Groundhog Day. So far, we've been exploring the history, the ceremony, all that surrounds Punxsutawney Phil.
And we've seen how, despite its iffy accuracy when it comes to predicting the weather, this tradition really captures people's imaginations and connects us to our past.
It's really fascinating how a seemingly simple event can have, such a huge cultural impact. And speaking of that, you mentioned earlier that Groundhog Day has really, permeated our pop culture in ways we might not even realize.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about that iconic movie Groundhog Day, with Bill Murray.
Oh, of course. Classic.
Right? It's become practically synonymous with the holiday itself. It's using that whole concept of reliving the same day over and over, and it turns it into a metaphor for personal growth.
That's true. I never really thought about it like that, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how a comedic film about a cynical weatherman really ties into a rodent predicting the weather.
Well, the movie cleverly uses, that cyclical nature of Groundhog Day to explore these deeper themes of self-discovery and redemption. Bill Murray's character, he's totally trapped in a loop at first.
Yeah.
Reliving the same day, filled with all this frustration, cynicism, you name it. But eventually, he actually uses this repetition to learn, grow, and ultimately he transforms himself.
So it's like the movie is taking this lighthearted tradition and kind of giving it a deeper, more philosophical spin.
Yeah, exactly. It makes us ask ourselves, how can we break free from our own routines? And, how can we find meaning in the everyday, even when it feels repetitive?
Huh. That is a really interesting perspective. I might have to rewatch that movie with this newfound understanding. But beyond the movie, what other examples are there of how Groundhog Day has, sort of made its mark on our culture?
Well, think about it. Even the phrase Groundhog Day has become part of our vocabulary. It's often used to describe any situation that feels repetitive or monotonous. That feeling of being stuck in a rut.
Yeah, I've definitely had days that felt like Groundhog Day in that sense. But I'm also curious about, the economic impact of the actual tradition itself. You mentioned Punxsutawney benefits a lot from Phil's fame, right? Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Punxsutawney is a pretty small town, less than 6,000 people. But every February 2nd, it totally transforms into this, bustling tourist destination.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, they get tens of thousands of visitors from all over the world, and they all come to see Phil make his prediction. It's a huge boost to their local economy.
That's wild. It's amazing how this one groundhog can generate that much attention and revenue for a small town.
It really speaks to, the lasting power of tradition and folklore. It's that human desire to connect with something, bigger than ourselves.
As we're doing this deep dive into Groundhog Day, it's making me think about all these other, folk traditions and beliefs we have, right? Things we do or say without really questioning where they come from or why we still hold on to them.
You're right. Groundhog Day is kind of a good example, right?
Yeah.
It reminds us that there are tons of other customs and beliefs that shape our lives in subtle and unconscious ways. Think about superstitions, knocking on wood for good luck or not walking under ladders.
Oh, I totally do the knock on wood thing. Do you?
I'm guilty of it too.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we might not even literally believe these superstitions will change anything, but there's something about the ritual,
It's comforting in a way.
Exactly. It's that feeling, that connection to something beyond the everyday. And these traditions, whether it's Groundhog Day or a silly superstition, they give us this sense of continuity, belonging, like connecting us to something bigger than ourselves.
So even in our like modern tech-driven world, we're still influenced by these ancient beliefs and
Oh,
practices.
way more than we realize, for sure. And it's really fascinating to think about how these traditions persist and how they even evolve, over time.
This has been so enlightening. We've covered everything from, how Phil makes his prediction to the deeper meaning of the Groundhog Day movie to the economic side of it all.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's always more to uncover, always more to explore.
I'm ready for more. What other fascinating insights do you have for us? All right, welcome back to our Groundhog Day deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered so much already, from the history to the ceremony and even like that whole philosophical side of things.
Definitely. We've seen just how much Groundhog Day, despite it not really being a reliable way to predict the weather, continues to capture people's attention and connect us to like our past and traditions.
Yeah, it's amazing how one furry little guy can spark such a huge range of conversations. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier, that whole idea about Groundhog Day being just one example of how folk traditions and beliefs really influence our lives, maybe in ways we don't even realize.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Groundhog Day really acts as this cool lens to look at those other customs and beliefs that shape our culture, sometimes in really subtle ways.
I'm curious, like, what are some other examples of these traditions or beliefs? You mentioned superstitions earlier.
Right. Think about those everyday things we do almost without thinking, like tossing salt over your shoulder to avoid bad luck or knocking on wood for good luck. Practices passed down through generations.
I have to admit, I knock on wood sometimes. Do you?
I catch myself doing it too. It's funny because we might not really believe these superstitions, like literally,
Yeah.
but they still kind of hold a certain power.
Yeah, totally. There's something comforting about those rituals.
Right. It's a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
Right.
And it's not just superstitions, right? There are tons of traditions and customs that shape how we live our lives.
Like what?
Well, think about holiday celebrations or wedding customs or even just the way we greet each other. All these traditions, no matter how big or small, they connect us to our heritage and give us a sense of continuity and belonging.
So it's like Groundhog Day is just this small example of a much bigger idea, a reminder that we're all part of this huge tapestry of traditions and beliefs that shape our experiences and, connect us as a society.
Exactly. It's a reminder to look beyond what's on the surface, to think about the things that influence our actions and perceptions that we may not even be aware of.
And it's a good reminder that even those traditions that seem kind of silly or outdated, they serve a purpose. They bring people together, offer comfort, and connect us to our shared history.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Groundhog Day, I think a good question to ask ourselves is, what traditions and beliefs shape your life? And what do they mean to you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It makes you think about your own cultural background and all those traditions around you and really appreciate them. Well, thanks for joining us today on this journey of discovery. We hope you've learned something new about Groundhog Day and that whole idea of folklore and tradition.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those deep dives going.